This aggression that is lived constantly in the rural sectors, we want it to be reverted and changed to be able to have a communication like the one that we're having here of freedom of expression, free speech, but that almost never happen in the media. We cannot have the spaces for women and girls to have access to a radio, for example, to communicate. Radio is still the one that gets to the community, and almost impossible to be on the television and the social media. The elites are the ones that are managing that because they have the tools, because they have the equipment. In the rural world, we don't have cell phones of high quality, so it's very little what we can do. And also, we don't have internet signal. In Ecuador, for example, only 16% of the population has got cell phones. So how can we have access to investigate or try to know what's the real thing or what's fake, what's the honest thing, and what is inducing us to act involuntarily and to generate a pressure to destabilize and can generate a noise at the levels of organizations and to break the harmony. They buy the heads of the leaders, and that breaks the community union from the transnational companies. So the world needs to acknowledge that in the rural world, where we are the agro-productive women that we are feeding the world, we should have better opportunities to be heard, to be valued, and to trust that if they invest more resources from the governments from different spaces, nationwide, locally, regionally, maybe that could be changed in terms of the access to internet gaps, the access to communication, because there's still in the region lack of literacy. So if we are total illiterate or partially structurally, as they call it, really the communication will not be well used. And I was here on another panel that we need to select, but of course when humble people from the countryside don't have the opportunity of having connectivity, for example, let alone instruments like a cell phone of a good quality, as they call it now, last generation cell phones, intelligent smartphones, so that makes a big gap in the rural world, and that we live big disadvantages. I'm very hopeful that maybe over time the media is going to be a honest media, and also to have the willingness to go out. Mr. President said that the journalists should go to the countryside to get to know how people live there, up to informing the local realities in the face of the compared to the local reality nationwide.
Thank you very much. The truth is that I feel very honored to be here with these women. Multitudes Foundation works in 9 countries in the region. One of those countries is Ecuador, where we're fighting gender discrimination in indigenous community people. I would like to continue with Maria Reza.
National recognition. You are a Nobel Prize and a tremendous human rights defender. You have worked with governments in multiple platforms. So my question to you is, how do you think governments can overcome the fear of regulating social media platforms and change the narrative about freedom of expression being threatened by regulating the industry of social media platforms and big tech?
Oh, thank you. I'm dying to hear from everyone else on the panel. But I mean, first, if you're a government and you are waiting for big tech to regulate itself, that's called impunity. You will lose more power on a daily basis if you do not put the guardrails in place today. Part of the reason, I mean, you heard me this morning, I'm so sorry I was emotional, but I know too many journalists who have died, right? But we have seen this erosion, and we have seen what you're gonna hear about today is gendered disinformation, which is the first sign of the erosion of a democracy in every country that I have worked in around the world. So the top priority really is legislation, but if it's okay, let me quickly just show you the way it worked in the Philippines and how we're electing illiberal governments democratically, right? So the first was, for me in 2016, the online attacks began. And I embraced Facebook. I embraced social media because Rappler is built on social media. If in 2011 its search was better, I may not even have built a website. I thought technology could jumpstart development. So very wrong. Do not outsource your development to big tech companies that really only want it. So what happened is these exponential attacks. The best part of being targeted by the government, my government at that point in time, was that I was, our news organization was under attack, so we could see the behavior. We could also see the data, because I was the journalist under attack, because you know how difficult it is to get data from these companies to actually fight back. And then finally, the last one is I build the tech, right? I'm in charge of building our tech, and slowly I began to realize that their choices for every single point moved towards profit, but was harmful to you. Hi, friends from tech companies. We are partners with every one of them, right? So what happened was the weaponization of social media was followed by the weaponization of the law. It's 2017. I had 21 investigations. 2018, the first shutdown order. 2019, I kept getting arrest warrants. So that was the beginning of 11 arrest warrants, and then 2020, right around the pandemic, I was convicted of cyber libel. To be here, I have to actually be ask for permission from the Supreme Court to travel to you. This is the same everywhere around the world. Let's hear from Brazil, yeah? And I think, to go back to your question, it's time to do something about it, because you must protect your citizens. This is like letting somebody build this building and then having it collapse on all of us because there are no laws about buildings. There should be laws around the tech that manipulates our emotions to change the way we act in the real world.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria. That example really made it for me, because it's absolutely right.
100 years in jail, right? That was what I had to face in order to keep going in those 11 criminal charges. 103. As sorry, you have to laugh.
Well, thank you. I wanted to ask the question next to Christina Wilford. Just last week, your organization published a report on gender disinformation. It's called Big Tech and the Weaponization of Misogyny in the Brazil online ecosystem, which provides an assessment of the size and the scope of the problem of digital threats to women in public life in Brazil. But can you tell us how much of that threat is related to gender disinformation in Brazil? And also, is this threat also visible in other countries of Latin America?
Yes, I would love to.
And here comes the data and the research.
Yes,
so
just a little visual to map it out. So it's a little cold here today, right? So I'm going to use some hot words to warm us up, because I'm tired of having the same conversations for multiple years in a way that is essentially asking women to be more resilient to gendered disinformation rather than asking the companies to be more responsible for their products. So let me, thank you. Let me take the spirit of the land that we're on and what has been the history of women in this country, speaking truth to power in order to change things. So this is what we need in this moment. Are there any tech company representatives in the audience? Raise your hand, please. Okay. All right. Okay. Well,
the good one. You're right.
Your products are failing. They're failing women, they're failing girls, they're failing societies, and you're not respecting the territorial integrity of the countries that you operate in. So if you would like to talk about protected whistleblowing options, I'm happy to direct you to resources, because this is no joke. And I gathered some information around the climate issue, so let me just highlight it a little bit, because we need to have an honest, credible conversation in order to get to the right remedies. So when we look at the issue that is absolutely distorted right now around so-called free expression, we are not in any way considering the free expression rights of the women leaders and women politicians who have no voice, have no agency, cannot protect their reputation, cannot report responsibly, cannot hold power, and big industries like big oil to account. This is not free expression. Essentially, what gendered disinformation is dependent on is the audience-building tools of social media, the megaphone, the organizing, the deception, the financing, the radicalization. This has nothing to do with protecting speech. This is what's going on. This is the impact and aim to undermine women leaders to serve larger anti-democratic goals. And let's look at how big oil is actually participating in this debate. So little examples. We'll go around the world in hopefully 30 seconds. We have Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is a massive focus of gender disinformation because of her commitment to green energy. So one faked article says, AOC says climate change has tarnished her dreams of motherhood, right? So they're trying to tie it into fertility. You have an indigenous activist in Brazil who had given a 2021 UN climate change conference speech. Afterwards, there was a deep fake of someone who wasn't her, pictured in a swimsuit, and accused her of lying about being indigenous. In the case of Greta Thunberg, one of the most inspiring young activists, her abilities are mocked repeatedly at high volume to undermine the message. Here's another article. Fox Greg calls Greta Thunberg one of the shrieking psycho brats that has poisoned the dialogue with hysteria. Those words are gendered. They're meant to organize online mobs. They're meant to undermine her message. Let's go now to Canada. The former Minister of the Environment, Catherine McKenna, who has not given up fighting for her agenda, but she was targeted with the Climate Barbie hashtag campaign that resulted in death threats to her office and her daughters to undermine her agenda. But she continues on. Okay, one more example. Germany, the current foreign minister of Foreign Affairs, Annalena Baerbock, when she ran for chancellor, there was 5 times tax on her promoted by Kremlin accounts because of her agenda around green energy. This is influence operations. This is orchestrated campaigns, and it's exactly what we've seen in Brazil with the nerve, and she persisted, thanks to Maria Ressa's founding this amazing digital analytics firm. We can see, after analyzing 1.5 million pieces of data, that this is an orchestrated effort meant to silence women. If we care about free expression, then we should care about the silencing of women in politics and women journalists, because it is meant to do this, to further the anti-democracy movements, to create a vector for foreign influence, to kick women out of public life, and that says you don't belong. So, thank you for participating, but we have to do better, and so do international organizations. We are giving empty words at this moment, and everyone says, well, it's, regulation. We can't regulate. And in fact, you know who says they are pro-regulation? The tech companies themselves. They run ads that say millions of dollars they spent in the US saying regulate us, while they spend even more millions undermining the regulation. So let's equate it to what big oil did. What did big oil do in the beginning days? They made campaigns all around recycling because they wanted to have the human dimensions of this a focus rather than their products. This is manipulation. So we can't possibly get to policy and to remedy, and it's a state of emergency. This is why I'm so passionate about it. because the agency, the voice, the ability for women to compete, to continue to be on stages like this is absolutely compromised by these companies who have nothing in mind for your territorial integrity, for the furthering of climate agendas, for policies we need for social cohesion. And I'm personally done. So I'm willing to have honest conversations with people who want to figure our way out of this, and I think we can, which is why she is persisting.
Thank you, Christina. I think it's by now very clear why I invited this wonderful group of women to be here, because it's not only, they'll usually talk about not enough data to regulate. There is enough data to regulate, and we start need to thinking about that. And it's very interesting what you mentioned about some of that data, because in Fundación Multitudes, what we have researched in Latin America and the Caribbean is that women in their intersectionality, they are 5 times more likely to be victims of online gender disinformation. So we need to be more strong about putting this foot forward and start talking and start dialoguing and hopefully regulating soon. I wanted to ask Samara, and because I think it's such an important part of what needs to happen in the region. I personally believe that Brazil is prepared to lead the efforts in terms of regulation for the region. It's a big market, can hold hands with the smaller markets and push, hopefully, social media platforms to sit down at the table and discuss this issue. So you're an expert in electoral law, along with your experience in managing crisis situations in environmental and virtual environments, which positions you uniquely to understand the challenges of combating disinformation. So how do you see the role of legal frameworks and governments in protecting women, environmental and human rights defenders from gender disinformation?
Thank you, Paulina. Thank you all. Nice. So it's an honor to be here with these wonderful women. My English is terrible. My Spanish doesn't exist, and we probably don't speak Portuguese. So I try to read my speech, but I want to share what we are thinking and do in Brazil. I think Christina showed a lot of data about that. Maria mentioned too. But I think we needed to explain the started of our work. So I start to read, okay? I'm a specialist in electoral law, like Paulina said. In March 2018, Marielle Franco, a city councilwoman, was my friend and my client, and she was assassinated. She was a black woman and a resident of one of the largest favelas in Rio de Janeiro. She was the most voted candidate in this election. She was assassinated with 5 shots to the head in an ambush. Her murder caused a profound shock in the country and in the world. Brazil has one of the worst rates of women in politics, and she represents hope in those elections. Shortly after her assassination, while we had a beautiful demonstration of solidarity, a process of disinformation began, with intensify in volume that we had never seen before in Brazil. The allegations were mainly that she had ties to drug trafficking, and that's why she was killed. This narrative is very common to justify the murder of black and peripheral people. Since we had never experienced anything like that in the country in 2018, there are no experts. Right now we have a lot of experts, thank God, and us. Neither from a legal nor a communication perspective. We formed a task force and combined legal action, communication narratives, popular support, and support from traditional media, our broadcasts, to reverse the image and preserve Marielle's honor and memory. But this was not the first situation in which violence against women attacked those who dare to be in politics and will not be the last. We live in a world marked by scaling conflicts deeply related with issues of inequality and social fragmentation. These include gender disparity, the preserved spread of misinformation and the challenge posed to democratic elections, which are vital for global geopolitical stability. We are dedicated to addressing this inequality fold, a new approach to globalization that takes their issues head-on. In Brazil, the impact of misinformation in our elections, for example, is terrible. We raise doubt about the legitimacy of our electoral systems, triggering crises of trust, and undermined political participation, particularly among women. Our experience demonstrate how misinformation and hate speech have directed significant engagement in politics, especially among Black women. The problem against the violence against Black women in Brazil, it's very, very profound. And the Black women, in most part, are often completely to abandon their political aspirations or withdraw from social media due to coordinated attacks by fake news and hate campaigns. But I have a new, and I'm glad to announce that yesterday in Brazil, we reached a historic decision in one case. One case involving Beni Brioli, is a councilwoman, and he is attacked by a deputy in her. The deputy said a lot of words against this congresswoman, and fortunately, we could use our law, our gender political violence law, to fight against these attacks. And these deputies are condemned. And this decision, it's historic because we can't fight against these attacks. And this is not a freedom of expression of these deputies, it's other thing. And despite our law just protect representatives and candidates, there is one step. We need to more. We need to protect journalists, activists, and all women who want to be part of the elections. Protect freedom of expression and combat misinformation are not conflict objectives, but complementaries. By promoting equitable access to accurate information and safeguard citizens against hate speech, we reinforce the foundations of democracy and ensure a more complete and accountable exercise of both individual and collective rights. And to conclusion, it's very important to understand the role the platforms deal with this problem. We need to understand the platform. They are not just a simple intermediary. They play the role. They recommend content. They moderate content. And in this sense, we needed to find a way to regulate, preserve the rights, but regulate and guarantee these platforms are part of the solution and not part of the problem. And right now, they are part of the problem. So that is our compromise, and I'm very happy to share with you.
Thank you, Samara. Thank you so much. Doña Elisa, como académica e investigadora centrada en
researcher and intercultural researcher, you're going to input a unique perspective to this discussion. The indigenous Mapuche population is negatively impacted and constantly impacted, not only due to the impact of the climate change, but also from environmental practices which are irresponsible and a much more powerful way compared to other populations. What kind of role should the indigenous women assume to influence the environmental policies, and what kind of mechanisms do you think are appropriate to defend women against disinformation, misinformation, and continue its vital work in the human rights defense? Thank you very much to the Multitudes Foundation, also to you, Paulina. The truth is that I prepared this presentation in my mother language, which means media for the indigenous people. I say this because media for the indigenous people should be also in the indigenous language available. And my presentation is based on what the experience has been of misinformation as the incorrect information, misleading information, and information that many times, due to lack of awareness, has impacted the indigenous women who struggle not only for a gender issue. Our struggle is for the rights of the territory, the rights of the nature, the rights to water, to air, to raise our children in our culture and languages. So we have faced barriers, and not only now, but I bring here these 4 great women from the 90s. I will try to be very quick in this sense. In the 90s, the Machi, Juana Santander, together with 29 women and 130 Mapuches from the communities where they were accused of illegal association and territory takeover, a case that is still in the Inter-American Court. Then we have Nicolás Quintamal, a defender of against the Ralco Dam. And you know what happened in the end? The dam was installed and they destroyed the territory, the Pehuenche territory, and unfortunately she died there. She drowned in that dam, in those waters. And the sister Macarena Valdez, a defender of the river, who died in very strange circumstances, and we don't know still the reasons for her death. And also here we got Marchi Francisca Lincolnao, defender of territories, and she was accused unfairly about she defends the traditional medicine. And the women who were part of the Constitutional Convention, and in the center I included that information of a new Chile is Vor, Mari Mari Compuche, which means greetings to the sisters and brothers forever. Unfortunately, we were object of misinformation, and there was a big manipulation from the press fostered by political parties that in that aim to win the election, they used misinformation and used the lack of information of the people to say that the plurinationality was going to divide the country, and the indigenous people, we were going to have access to a privileged justice system, and a series of lies and misinformations that damaged that democratic process. Also, they said that we were promoting abortion with that, and unlimited abortion. And in that context, I had the chance to live the strongest misinformation case, lies promoted by the press, the media, without accusing and following my whole academic career, accusing I don't have any titles and no academic training, and also impacting my person to the point that I don't know how to speak, because if one of the things that we have is our capacity of language, and here this is of course lies around my person, implanted by people on television. They accuse excess of salary and payments, even impacting and saying that I have taken a bath naked in hotels, attempting to attack the women leaders. That's the type of thing that they say on the media. This is a recent information from EMOL, a network from El Mercurio, the Mercury newspaper, putting in question my sabbatic or Saturday permit.
En 24, un grupo de historiadoras feministas sale acusando de misoginia, racismo y clasismo todo lo que se ha dicho la prensa en contra de mi persona. Entonces lo que pasa es que los problemas que a nosotros nos afectan, como ustedes pueden ver, son discriminación y estigma, la violencia con la cual se nos trata, y también hay un tema de discriminación lingüística.
In terms of language, because we don't have any media in our languages, and also silencing the different voices, and to restrict the demands of the indigenous women, because with all of this process, there are things that we can learn. There are many learnings. As indigenous women, we have refugied in the knowledge of the ancestral movements of the past, because we are not the first ones. We come from other generations before us, and we continue also just to give now the word to a new generation that are coming soon. But we don't trust in the entrepreneurial media. They normally have had a speech for journalists, and the truth is not really there, and a big part of everything that has happened is not there in terms of the women, indigenous women, and this is due to the lack of knowledge about the indigenous people. And as you know, we have not been recognized by a constitution here in Chile, and that also affects our political work and the progress of the women and the indigenous movement, and also women who have exerted a representation role publicly. Thank you very much, Elisa.
Durante el año 2022 nosotros hicimos un estudio profundo sobre la
We did a deep study on the Constitutional Convention on Disinformation and Gender, and what we discovered is that it was not even necessary to have this information on the process or the content itself of the draft. It was just enough to have this information in a brutal way on the women at the Constitutional Convention. We just have 5 more minutes, and I would like to have a last question, because I consider it to be very important, because the narrative that we communicate, this information comes from traditional communication media. So
what is the role that you see for journalists and media on combating gender disinformation? How can we work together in this fight and not as antagonists?
I don't think we should be antagonists at all. I think what we need to do a better job at as journalists is in the definitions. Right? Part of what's happened globally is, Sophia Noble calls it a flattening of meaning. Right? The technology has taken meaning out of the word. So the first step is, the data is there. You know, we use natural language processing to get the attacks, and then social network analysis to look at the networks that spread this. And you can see the design of the platforms. We should be doing these stories. We should stop being fanboys and fangirls of the tech. The impact is now really clear. I still am. I love tech. But that's the first, and that will form a whole of society approach. It is working with research groups, with the victims, with the distribution network, with governments, this is insidious, and in many ways more insidious than in the past, because you don't see it, right? Only the target sees everything that is pounding them to silence. And who wants to be in their own separate reality at this point in time? So I think it's critical that, and you've heard me this morning, so I will shut up already, but this is it. This is the moment. You don't want half of the world, the women in the world, opting out because they're under attack. Only they feel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria. I would like to offer 30 seconds to each of you, 30 segundos para cada uno para mandar un mensaje final.
30 seconds to each one of you to send the final message, and I think it is very clear that this is a threat.
The problem is half the solution. I believe that we can do big things in this world, and I believe that we can get our hands around these multinational companies. The stories here are heartbreaking, and thank you for telling them. We should not put women through this again. It's sort of like forever chemicals. So even when these lies and distortions are debunked, they live on forever. So we just have to choose. We have to choose. Which side of history do you want to be on? Do you want to contribute to knowing what we know from tech companies themselves and their ex-employees, from all the data that's out there? Do we want to deal with that, or do we want to keep giving women a Band-Aid, which is very sexist, and ask them to be more resilient rather than stop the bleeding? So plenty of ways in which you can join the cause, because this is about the people. This is not about companies.
Thank you, Cristina. Samara?
I think it's very important we share our best experience to deal with the disinformation and to deal with. We needed to find a way to protect our women, and in the digital space, this is so difficult because we are an easy target. It's so unbelievable that always the women is a target, and we are, as an agenda, a target to the extremist right. It's not because we are weak. It's because we are strong, and we have more power to deal with this. Because our resilience, it's a resilience, a historical resilience. So I think as a government, we wanted to put all our tools, all our power in this agenda to guarantee we can do different. And I'm very happy to be here.
And we're so powerful that they just told me that we have some extra time. So I'm gonna ask you a very,
no pressure.
A very particular question. How do you see the role of intergovernmental collaboration in addressing gender disinformation?
I think we can do a lot with when we have help, when we help each other. In the last couple days, we do an event, a side event in the G20 about information integrity. It's the first time this concept entering the debate, in the G20 debate. And G20 is a very strong space, and put the debate about information integrity in that means we are compromised to deal with the disinformation, deal with the hate speech, deal with the conspiracy theories. And this fight needs a value. And this value, information integrity, it's a way to guarantee the protagonism for the women, the protagonism for the environment activists, the protagonism of the Black people. So I think the collaboration starts in our multilateral institutional organisms and multi-stakeholders too. So we need to put this debate in all the space we stay, and we are very engaged in that.
Thank you, Samara. And I do wanted to talk about a little bit about the more about the research, and especially, Christina, in your research, how much have you found that what you talk about silencing and keeping women out? So what do you see is the real impact of gender disinformation, particularly in women environmental and human rights defenders? In our region, we see how, you know, the combat, those women are in the first line of defense, not only in their communities, but also in the fight that they're taking against big corporations and climate change.
So as it was said, this is not about hate speech and misogyny. Those are the tactics, right? So this is about power. So that's why when it's journalists holding power to account, when it's climate leaders holding industry to account, so we have to be comfortable with the power conversation. And that's what our research shows, is that the platforms want us to talk about, oh, we didn't invent misogyny. And they also, especially in the global south, basically are saying, like, men are more hateful in the global south. You have a man problem here. I don't believe that. I believe most men want to protect and cherish women, and they want their daughters to have the ability to be who they want to be, whether it's a journalist or a politician. And so the reporting and the analysis that we've done, and why I feel so passionate about it, is that it's not about culture. It's not about how conservative, so-called, a society is. It's not about west to east, north to south. It's all of it. And so we have an opportunity to, one, immediately we have to help the women who are the targets of this. I like to say targets, not victims. And give them the tools, unfortunately, to understand what they have to do to immediately protect their agency. Reporting is useless. PEN America did an analysis about the reporting processing system, because this is what the platforms say. Oh, go ahead, give us your data. What are you seeing? We're really interested. We'll take care of it. The name of that report is Shouting into the Void. That was the analysis of the reporting process. So we shouldn't push women to mechanisms to manage this that don't actually do anything. So that's sort of one thing. And then we need to really bolster our ability to have this kind of conversation around power in order to activate what we need in philanthropy, in society, in individuals. And don't be depressed, even though Instagram in particular is making young girls very depressed and suicidal, and that's intentional in order to take their agency and voice out of it. So we do have to be strong in our identification of what's going on. We have to have solidarity as women across the world, and we have to point our institutions to more responsible ways of engagement, even though I know it's tough, because these platforms are everywhere, and it seems hopeless at times, but it's not. Don't get dystopian. We can do this.
Thank you, Cristina. Luz, voy a continuar contigo.
Luz, I'm going to finish with Dr. Loncon. So from the world of rural communities, where we see that besides, we have a big disparity on the access to the digital age. What can we do to protect? Because I like very much what Christina is saying. We don't need to ask them not to be more resilient. We don't need to empower you. What can we do, and what can rural women do to fight this phenomenon and the attacks of disinformation and gender? Well, actually, we will have to solve some debts from the states and society and academia, and also from the large communications companies. Like in this morning, I was talking about Wikipedia. We use them more or less, but I think that what we can do as rural women in Latin America and the Caribbean, as LAG network, what we're pushing is that we declare Rural Women's Decade, and we managed that the OEA approved the decade of women and teenage of rural areas from 2024 to 2024. And I don't want that to be a dead letter and or create a slogan, but we want that first we need to strengthen and we need to invest in the strengthening of human talent so our women, girls and teenagers from rural areas, we can have our own voice, so we can stand up in front of any stage, so we can be taken into account by traditional media, not for other people to tell us what to do, but to give us the space so we can be the voice of our own players and protagonists of our own things, as we know, fit in the world, because after pandemic years, the world needs to recognize that most commercial or shopping centers didn't fit the world. The women that were working in rural areas, we fed the world. So that's why first, strengthening human talent, and for that we're thinking about what is important, and it's important to institutionalize schools that can create women leaders so we can have bigger skills and have our own voice in any stage. Another important thing, of course, is that with this concerning the decade of indigenous and rural women, we can strengthen and drive, and I invite people from Latin America and the world that can support us to strengthen rural women networks and rural women organizations, because alone we will not reach anywhere, but organized and together we can be a big force that allows us to grow together and also empower different spaces in media. And my question here is, from your experience, who are the people who appear in traditional media every day? And in social network, who are the people that are doing all the business? How many spaces are given to rural women so they can give an opinion on how we live, what we feel, what we need, and which are our priorities? I leave you that question there, but also is that I would like to invite you. I don't want to leave you with sadness. I would like to encourage you for you to be our ambassadors, godparents of the decade of rural women, and that you take it as yours, so that can be landed on public policies there at the distance and rural communities. Because when they do research, they get to the city, but they never reach, as they call it, to the peripheral communities. And if we talk about the Amazons, there are really 6 countries that are part of the Amazons. Who and where? For example, in Ecuador, there are communities that we just get by helicopter, that we just had an accident last week, 8 people, 5 military people and 3 civilians. But we just can get it through air, right? And by water, to 2 to 3 people. So how can we generate this equality and opportunity so people we can have a better access to information, but also to the same big communication change? Please think that women, teenagers, and girls in rural areas are not only a vote in democracy, but we are human beings, that we are there at the voting, and we're going to show my power and confidence to the people who are going to govern us. And as they told me, because I come from, I lived it, right? I come from the start. It was really hard for me to be here, very much. Excellent. Thank you, Luz. Thank you. Thank you. I think if you allow me, thank you, because for women and girls in the rural area, it's not easy to get to school. It's not easy to go to school. It's not easy to go to college. It's not easy to be in power spaces and to be decision makers. It's not easy to reach media. Once I asked a journalist from one of the big TV channels in Quito when we were in the parochial governments, why don't you give us a space to talk about our rural reality? And he said, and what do you want to talk about? About what we do. About what we serve the country. Yeah, of course, we go once in a while to the reality. So they see us in a pejorative way. We see us despectively. They consider that we're not able to transfer what we live, what we feel, and what we do. And if anything has to be recognized by the world after pandemic times, is that the food that reaches comes from the effort of the women that we work in rural, without salary, without times, no advantages and no recognition. But when we go to shopping malls, everybody pays what is labeled. But when humble people, early morning, they go to sell the products in the city, that they get a big sacrifice. They're stolen, they're insulted, they're chased, and they're even the police takes their products. There is no social justice, because I think it's the first time, thank you, Paulina, that I'm talking about this, and maybe I'm talking badly. But I would like to finish this by saying that I have big hope that in this decade there could be a miracle, that among all of us we can look for women, girls, and teenagers today will be the women and future women, that they can have equal opportunities. And not equality by equality. You can't choose where you're born, either in the country or in the city, or you're born a woman or a man. But you can choose and decide what to do to improve the life quality and condition of the people who are mostly forgotten, because there in the communities we lack everything. We lack everything. There are no services, no goods, no opportunities. Just some time ago in Ecuador, 0.3% of women, rural women, reached to get to college as I did. Because I, until the year 23 years old, I was in only fourth grade primary, and I had to finish my primary school between 23 and 24. And at 35, I want to know what schools, and I graduated at 44 years old in the year 1993 in my high school. And now I want my children to be what I couldn't be, because I didn't want to be inferior to anyone. And then I managed to go to college. But if I hadn't done those efforts, probably I wouldn't be here today talking to you. Thank you very much for your generosity, for listening to me. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Y en realidad es...
I really want to thank the story of Luz, because this is a reality that is lived. Also, apart from being a rural woman, she's a defender of the human rights and environmental defender, just like Dr. Locon. Doctor, I wanted to ask a question that is very specific, and we're going to close the panel with that. How much is normalized the disinformation or misinformation against women who are in the public life? How normalized you saw that phenomenon as an object of gender misinformation during your position in the conventional constitution? Well, as my colleague have just said, the information also has been taken to a state of privilege. There are the ones who have the right to use the information and to manage the information, and others that come from the bottom. And many times we are not heard. They don't listen to us. We need that listening, that dialogue that we have just heard here, that take us to that word that has been silenced. So, what's the challenge that we have is how we can break the silence of the people who have been postponed, excluded, and how we can fight that misinformation. A big part of the misinformation in our case is due to that they don't know the countryside sectors and indigenous sectors. So the issue is how can we form and train journalists that can have a broad vision about their own country, their own culture, and the world, and the postponed populations. Unfortunately, the skill and training has been egocentric, and basically they taught the information based on what's coming from abroad, but the professionals are taught about on the education, the press, of the health, and everywhere that the indigenous people, the countryside people, we don't know, we don't have knowledge. And the truth is that in this 21st century, with this challenge of the climate change, we are guardians of the knowledge that we have harvested generation after generation. So to harvest this misinformation, it's important to open the doors of the academias. It's important to open the forums at the universities and colleges and to invite and encourage people that come from the territories, that come from the populations, and to talk with them, to listen to them, and maybe to enrich the academia, because the knowledge is not in Europe only. The knowledge is also in our territories, in women, in our grandmothers, in ourselves. That's a big challenge. And the rest is just to invite you, everyone, to defend together, everyone, the motherland, because it's not just the countryside people that we're going to be able to defend not only the indigenous people, but that sensitivity that requires our mother, that care that requires our mother. We need to show it from all of you. And where are we going to learn those practices to cultivate and to praise the motherland from the indigenous world, from the countryside world? That's where we have a big challenge of intercultural dialogue to be able to face this big crisis that is impacting us. Thank you very much. Thank you much, Doctor. Thank you much to all the panelists. Also, we want to listen to you. You see that we receive this brochure with a QR code, and we want to know from you and if you have been affected by the gender misinformation. Thank you very much once again to all the panelists and all of the audience. Ya voy.